Well, welcome everybody. Today we have Rick Stevens from Santa Fe, or living down in Santa Fe, moved there a number of years back from Michigan. So he knows all about that lake effect snow. And Stephanie Hartshorn, a Colorado native. And we're going to talk about something that really, like, when I wanted to do some more talks this week, because we were having fun. I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun. But when we were talking about doing these, I called Rick and Stephanie right away because I wanted to get the two of them on a conversation together and talk about this patterning in their work, which is, there's something about both of these artists that reminds me a bit of fiber artists. And, you know, from quilt makers to people who are doing really intricate fiber designs and things like that, that you even see in museums. But there's something that is tactile about their work. With Stephanie, it's a lot, to me, having to do with surfaces. And with Rick, it is the patterning that's happening with the paint and the color and the things that are coming together in his work. There's also this interesting thing when I was talking to Rick and Stephanie about doing this. There's this interesting conversation that came up with both of them independently. And so I definitely want to explore it together. And that is this conversation of memory and how memory plays into these works. So without further ado, what I am going to do right now is I'm going to put a spotlight on both of our artists. And so I kind of like this. So it's like we have you two together on stage and having this conversation with us. And so as always, everyone who is in attendance, please use that chat button and ask questions. And we have these two fabulous artists all to ourselves this afternoon. So ask away. So I want to start off with this idea of patterning, and I wonder if you both would touch on this idea. Stephanie, with your background in chemistry and engineering and architecture, right? There's an architectural patterning. And Rick, you're coming from a painterly background, but I think there's something that's really emerging in your work that, again, it has this sense of being textiles. And I'm wondering if you would talk about that. And I don't know if you've ever thought of your work in that sort of tactile, textile kind of way, but would you talk about that, what's happening on the surface with your work?
Well, I've always worked in layering, and I've gone back and forth between other mediums like pastels, which is conducive to layering. You have to fix it and go on top. And my oils and pastels back and forth have informed each other. And I think tapestry is good. I think we're going to show a Klimt that's a very, tapestry-like painting in a minute. It's called Forest of Fur. And it's just taking one pattern, almost like a fractal, which takes a design or a pattern found in nature, and it just keeps repeating it and repeating it. And complexity just sort of builds up. That's one way to look at how I kind of come to just, a little simplicity, which becomes complexity.
Hey, you know what, Rick? Why don't I go ahead and grab that Klimt?
Great.
Yeah, and let's just take a look at that right now.
That's an Innis, and there's the Klimt.
Here's the Klimt.
So you see what I mean, how it's just pattern, and what really kind of gives it reference is some of these, there's three little white dots up at the top, and then some repeated white dots that could be flowers, and just all these little dots that create a forest, but it kind of like you lose the forest for the trees kind of idea.
Right. Well, and I think if you've ever seen Klimt's work in person too, it really does have that sense of these layers, but not in a way that it's not a really tactile sense of layering like you get with Stephanie's work. To me, it's almost a layer of imagination that is, and not that yours isn't, Stephanie, but there's not that surface that's happening, right? And so, like, Rick, Klimt does seem to be an influence in a way. And I'm wondering if you would just talk about that with your work.
Yeah, Klimt is known more for his figures and his patterns, but more and more his landscapes are getting popular. And this painting I saw decades ago, along with a sister painting, a couple of them actually that are very similar. And it just blew me away and really affected me kind of down the road. And more recently, people are just discovering this and they're sending this image to me on Facebook and say, yeah, I know that. But you talked about the imagination. It reminds me of a William Blake quote, which says, "To the eyes of a man of imagination, nature is imagination itself."
Wow.
And I think I kind of embody that or really take that on when I'm out in nature. I really try to let my imagination roam. Mm-hmm. And then it comes out, in memory. We talked about that later in the studio.
And you're painting on location. So what has become the very popular term of plein air. But mostly the studio is where things happen for you, right? Yeah,
the plein air is a great exercise, if nothing else, and I continue to do it. Well, partly because I love to be out there, but I do emphasize the studio more than being a plein air painter. I'm not a purist on that sense at all. Mm-hmm. But I still love to go out there, and sometimes I just have a sketchbook, a camera, or nothing, and just sit with it.
Oh, wow! Sort of a meditation.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
yeah.
How nice! Wow. Mm-hmm. And Stephanie, so to bring things back to you, you also do a lot of painting out on location. And it's been my understanding over the years of, talking to you that you also spend a lot of time looking and not necessarily brush to canvas.
Right. In a way, I feel like I spend most of my time looking, and then I do paint on location. It's just that I've spent more and more time developing a way of layering that can only happen in my studio. And early on when I was painting, it was all just wet on wet painting. Let's get it on. And there wasn't time passing. And I actually was uncomfortable with that in the beginning and thought, oh no, my paint's dried. I can't come in here. And I would say I'm almost at the opposite place now. I love the fact that I have dry layers to work with and texture to come over the top of, and that time passes.
Yeah. You're both more mature painters now. And is this a trust in the process kind of with your work?
Yeah, I for me, there's a depth of exploration that can happen now that probably wasn't happening before. And I really do think of it in a layering sense. I just immediately, my brain starts to think about the layers, looking through, almost like I'm looking through sheer veils. And I start to, I'm much more involved in the painting. And for me, when it was wet on wet, it was a pretty opaque experience. And just, not that it stops there, because that has beautiful effects that happen, but I like this peeking through, and that's an evolution. I find it very engaging for myself, and it is a trust in the process. I feel actually more comfortable. I feel I have more flexibility with what I'm doing. I can try something and pull it off and come at it again and discover things that I hadn't seen before, or not seen, but they're happy accidents. Some of them are controlled, but I never know exactly how it's going to happen.
Yeah, right. So, so again, that sort of idea of trust, but also, this to me is edging into this idea of memory. And is there a point in the painting process, Rick, where you get out of the way of the physical, like, this is the brush, this is ochre, this is that, I'm mixing these paints. Do you get out of the way of it? And could you tell us how that happens?
I think I know what you mean. I hope that happens in a day. Usually it will kind of get closer to that. Like Picasso said, when you come to the studio, like the Japanese will kick off their shoes, he leaves his body at the door and, kind of forgets himself and just totally absorbs. I think you get so used to your materials that it becomes innate and you're not, the thinking about it flows. You kind of get into that flow state, as they call it, which is a term usually attributed to sports, but it also can apply to, making art and music. And it's kind of getting beyond the thinking mind to a place of becoming one with the mountain. Except when you're making art, you're not risking your life. But you're taking risk in a way, and you have to you kind of cultivate a risk tolerance mentality. So you become comfortable with stepping off the known, which is fine. I mean, we all want to kind of build on our successes and develop a technique that we have a mastery of. But getting into that unknown territory is where the juice is. And I think a painting that has gone to that place has more life than when it's just sort of, executed to a formula.
Does your work surprise you when you do it?
I hope so. I mean, I sort of force the surprises, and there's sort of ways to do that. One way is to put it aside. So I'm working on a lot at a time, and I like to do layering also. And so I have a lot going. When you're working in oils, you can't just, like with pastels, go out and spray it and bring it back in and it's ready for another layer. If you want it to dry, you have to kind of work on something else until that's dry and then build up on those layers.
Yeah. Stephanie, does your work surprise you?
It does every single time.
Wow.
Yeah, it really does. It still feels a bit like, what do you know? When it's all said and done in the end, I stand back and I find surprise in it. So it's pretty cool. For lack of a better word, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And there's a big process that happens from the beginning to the end. And it's a very long, involved process that has there's a lot of wave riding in there. So to reach the point of the end and then stand back and like Rick said, you get, well, in a different way, you get away from it for a little while, and then you come back and look at it and you say, wow, there's some passages in here and elements that just sing. And I didn't know those were going to happen. I didn't know exactly, but I allowed the process. I allowed some things to just happen and they unfold in front of your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Is there okay, so there are all these books on art and fear and, the fear of letting yourself create and fear. But there's also, like, you guys aren't hang gliding or, doing that. But, is there something in you that you need to be on an edge of maybe a painting, take the painting to almost the edge of destruction or be like, hey, I'm jumping off into an abyss and I hope somebody catches me?
Is that for me or Stephanie?
Yeah, Rick, what do you think?
Well, you can sort of work that edge. And in fact, there's books about how to a formula, if you will, on keeping that edge alive to reach the flow state. And they say about 4% beyond what your comfort level is. So if you're playing tennis, if you play with someone who's better than you, you're going to get better, and you have to challenge yourself. but every time you kind of get to that sweet spot of where it's challenging, but not so challenging, you're frustrated and you get down on yourself. But if it's not challenging enough, you get bored and you might just not pay attention or give up. It's similar with painting. You need to keep that edge of challenge going. But if you're just throwing yourself into places that you can't get out of, which I've done a lot of times, then you either get lost or you just go back to what you know, and it's back to being boring again. So it's kind of playing that edge.
So, okay, I'm gonna read a question from Michael Smith here, but first I want to ask you both, what challenge have you taken on recently in your work that's pushed you?
Well, I'm like,
Go for it.
Right here. Here's one. And it's funny, it's interesting for me to say that clouds are a challenge, but I paint architecture and these solid objects, and there's a lot of line work involved and a lot of perspective right? And so for me to move into a really organic form is a big challenge. And I've been dipping my toe in that for the past year or so to find how I can do that. I can paint clouds. I've painted them before. But there's a big separation for me between painting them and speaking them and finding my own language with them. And I feel like I'm starting to get there, and it is really exciting. It is a bit scary for me because I'm going into an unknown place, and nuance of color and throwing things in there in a way that is pushing things. I come at things a little bit more, I don't know, if a barn is red, I'm like, okay, it's going to be red. I'm going to do these things. I do kind of infuse other little pieces of color, but clouds are white, but they're not white at all, and exploring a whole new palette, if you will, or way of thinking about color is, it's new. It's exciting.
Do you see yourself taking the style you have, like I'm seeing the tractor, big red over your shoulder, and applying that style to outdoor organic spaces without structure?
Very possibly. That's what's so fun about a lot of way I'll come at things is, I could have painted this with landscape behind it and rendered it, more like something like this. But, I have options of how I can come at things. And so it's just in the moment of what I'm connected to. Is it the object or is it the scene? And I love the idea of this has really, really thick paint on it. And I know as I start working on my clouds more, I'm going to be bringing that in there. And I've done it a couple times, and it's lovely.
Yeah. So Rick, how about you? Challenge recently that took you out of your comfort zone? Getting on a Zoom call with me is that
it's the sign of the times.
Yeah, right.
I bounce back and forth between more abstract work and more landscape and everything in between. And I've done that with smaller scale abstraction again recently. But one of the things that is new for me about 1.5 to 2 years now is, I've always gathered information in different ways. Sketchbooks, filled sketchbooks, and I started out black and white photos with going to a dark room and using those and slides, and now we have digital cameras. Well, I started using digital photography and putting it through iPhone apps and Photoshop apps. And then there's an app on the iPad called Procreate, so I can actually take a stylus and paint on it. And between all those things, I'm creating a digital painting, which now is my sketchbook. And the challenge is to sort of keep that, abstraction going that I really love. And it's also a little more photographically influenced. But I get to places that I wasn't getting to before because I was had my own brand of stylizing the landscape, and now I'm getting to new places. And that's exciting. And I'm combining all of those things I just mentioned too, with the old ways, with the sketchbook so that's kind of new to me, and it is proving to be really valuable.
Wow. It's interesting because I've often heard artists say when they feel like they're in a rut and say they paint in oils, then they switch to sculpture for a while or switch to oil painting or just do something that is just so out of their day to day and then come back really fresh. And it's interesting that how technology is doing that for artists these days too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Zoom calls too.
And Zoom calls too, right? Hey, that's me. Michael Smith has a question here, a concept here for you. The Blake quote is imposing, Rick. Yeah. So many of us view the out-of-doors landscape as a quasi-religious experience. Rick is clearly someone who the out-of-doors informs his emotional balance and commitment to art. I've admired Stephanie's work for years. She does not do pretty landscapes. My taste runs to landscape of desolation or destruction, and she has always appealed to that sensibility. And I think that is an interesting thing too. This idea of man's imposition into nature versus how man looks at or takes the concepts inside of himself is what I believe Rick is doing, and nature is kind of a sounding board in a way.
Yes, it could even go beyond that. In biocentrism, they talk about the animal observer, whether it's a human or just creates reality and not the other way around. And we are just systems that are like, which matter is continually passing through. We are ecosystems within ecosystems. The complexity is just overwhelming. Yeah. But if you're taking a spiritual approach like the Blake, there's just this all-pervading consciousness that's an intelligent force that pervades everything. And it's, what's the word? Panpsychism is a term for that. So it is a religious experience for me. And I think part of it is becoming, that one with nature. And part of that is letting go of our controlling nature. Humans have the most highly developed brain. The prefrontal cortex can allow us to do all these wonderful things, but it also is a real controlling factor. And to access those non-local states of awareness, you have to get beyond that, whether it's through meditation or, some sort of shamanic trance-induced thing or psychedelics or, so many ways.
So, talking about fear, and I think what you're touching on there, Rick, is quite possibly a pretty big aspect of that fear, because when you go into that place, to touch on that, if it's a spirit or a God form or your psyche or whatever, you can kind of open a Pandora's box. But also, I would think you're opening up yourself so much to the public when they walk in and see that work.
Yeah. My work, the paintings, to be honest, just this right here is more scary as far as being exposed to the public than showing my work, because with a piece of art, you don't really have to explain it. I mean, this is what I'm doing right now, which is more frightening to me than exhibiting it, because I'm not doing really, I guess it is a metaphor for just a projection of our psyche, of our spirit, but I don't feel uncomfortable showing a painting.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I guess you just get so used to it. And normally you don't have to explain it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then I get you on a Zoom call and it's all over. Hey, so Ginny Gulikowski has a question for both of you. How different is the initial concept from the finished piece? Stephanie, what do you think about that?
I would say the bones of mine are very similar. In that, I'm often working from reference images, and then I have a sketch, and it's just like, here we go. As far as composition, what is completely unknown to me is often how it all ends up turning out. And I don't have, there are ways that I'll lay paint on, and I've gotten used to those ways. And I don't like to get too comfortable with them. I'm constantly looking for, well, I've kind of come at that before this way. So is there a new way that I can lay that paint on? Is there a new way to do this? Or, when I was talking about coming into painting clouds, this is a new way for me to layer paint. Well, also here in the foreground, I have this funny thing. I usually come in at a particular intimate level with my landscapes. I call them portraiture of rural America. So I'm looking at buildings and the structures and implements on the land. That's a particular stance, literally, that I have next to something. But when I pan out more, I have to deal with foreground, or I have to deal with, clouds and sky. It's pushed me to find ways to describe that without being exacting, and that is the complete unknown for me, Jenny. Like I had no idea how this was going to come out. So I'm just playing with ideas and other things that I've done before and see, like, is this going to go? Is this going to take? But I had no notion of the detail of that in the end. Only certain things, like when I get into the buildings and articulate, I'm like, oh yeah, I know how to do that part. But there's this, anyway, it's a play of texture that's unknown, and then a play of knowns, which is the structure of it.
And so Rick, the same thing with you, the concept in your head to the finished product, because your work, okay, whenever I see your work, I'm not thinking, oh, Rick was at this national forest and he would, like, I don't. Whereas Stephanie, like we've talked about where you were, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've driven past that or something. So Rick, would you talk about that concept to finished?
Yeah, well, the work that I'm currently doing is a little more like Stephanie's, where I have a sketch and it's going to more closely stay to that. But I've worked totally the opposite too, where I jump into a painting, and those are usually turn out to be quite abstract. Not always, though. Sometimes a forest will evolve and it'll become more subject matter. So it's kind of all of those things. So I am dealing with a lot of things Stephanie just mentioned, and I'm trying to make my two divergent paths merge a little more, so the abstract work has more recognizable, or the other way around, where the landscape, I get a little more suggestive with it. I don't think I ever get too, it's never photographic, but I think the iPad studies are interesting because it's a different medium. It's not like a little oil sketch that I transfer up to a bigger painting, where I've solved a lot of those technical things already because I painted it. Here it's a different medium, so I have to interpret it in a new way. So that's pretty wide open.
Oh, nice.
I wanted to add on to earlier when we were talking about fear. That's actually a huge part of my work. Is I always reach a point of this massive moment of unknown. Like, I don't know how I'm going to solve this. I really don't, but I got to figure it out. And
is that fun for you, or is it like, what is that feeling like?
It's well, okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a pretty miserable, for me, it's a pretty miserable feeling. I go right into that place of, don't you know? I mean, come on, you've been painting for a while. You've put these things out. You've done these things. Like, come on, if you really had it together, you would know how to solve this. But I can say here on the other side of it, I'm glad I don't know how to solve these things, because it keeps me on my toes. It keeps my work fresh. It keeps that place of like, whoa, I'm about to dive into the unknown. And a number of the ways, the textures and the ways that I lay my paint now, and some of which that have become kind of a signature mark for me, have completely come out of moments of sort of exasperation. And I'm like, I don't know. And it's literally like standing on the cliff, and I take something and I'm so frustrated, but it's the best frustration. And I just say, oh, and I just go, and I immediately click into a different mindset. And it's a moment of like, I'm so stuck, I can't ruin it now, because at least I'm doing something.
Yeah.
And oftentimes beautiful things come out of it. It's a very liberating moment, but it takes a long time to get there.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I like to have a lot going at a time. So it helps my detachment level. So I don't know how I'm going to solve it, but I can put it away and then become more objective. And then later, I often, you get a rhythm of that. And I often can count on just seeing it in a whole new light and finding like, oh, I have solutions for this, which I didn't feel like I had before.
Yeah.
So Michael has written in here, I've always been attracted to works where the artist is making a change or trying something new. The work may not be as polished, but there is an energy and rawness that exposes more of the artist. And I'd like to touch on that. Thank you, Michael, for supplying me with all these great segues. You know what? Actually, I think I'm just going to make you a co-host. And I really wanted to talk about memory. And there's something that you wrote here, Rick, to recall an essence and bring it forth in the studio is more powerful than accuracy. Would you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't want to document a place and just try to worry about if I've got the recognizable features there. To me, it is more about the imagination and the emotion, the impact that I felt when I was there, and try to, capture that essence of something. Mm-hmm. And that's more powerful to me than something that just sort of is recognizable.
And you have that George Inness quote in front of you, or do you want me to read it?
Either way.
You know what, let me do a quick screen share and pull up that Inness while you read that quote.
Okay.
Let me see, I think it is right behind Klimt. There it is.
Yeah. So George Inness has been one of my longest faves, influence that I keep coming back to. He has this poetic mystery of the immaterial. Here's his quote: "The greatness of art is not in the display of knowledge or in material accuracy, but in the distinctness with which it conveys the impressions of a personal vital force."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the dreamlike imaginary landscape here. It's like the foliage or the trees are could be clouds as much. It's just all spirit.
Yeah. You know, it's a painting that I almost want to write Inness a letter and thank him for triggering my memories and making me feel part of this scene that is hundreds of years old, but there's things going on there as if I had floated into a dream with it. It's just so lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that is that thing of being able to, if it's at all possible, step inside an artist's dream or mind or state of being when you're looking at his or her work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. George Inness was very influenced by Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish philosopher who really saw auras around trees. He was quite a mystic and a contemporary of William Blake.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Beautiful. That is just beautiful.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh. Okay. Diana Woods would like to know, how has this year informed your work or perhaps changed your perspective of how you approach your work? Stephanie, what do you think? I mean, aside from being kicked out of your studio, which I'm sure has a little influence.
Right. Well, interestingly enough, I moved into a new studio at the beginning of really kind of as COVID was really coming around, and it was really liberating, exciting, and it still is. I love that space so much possibility there, and the light and everything. And but how has it changed? Well, I'm definitely missing being out and feeling connected to the spaces that I love to see. And, just kind of going back and looking at things is one thing, but it's so filling to be able to move and be out there and feel. it's a feeling thing, you know? And so what I'm looking for in my work is how can I connect more with my own work and feel it even more? And I think that's why this piece over here was a strong one for me. I remember being near this space and just the expanse, and I've wanted to capture that for the longest time. So it's kind of ironic that here at COVID, when we can't go out and be and doing these things that we normally do, I'm looking at painting paintings that are talking about vast space and this feeling of endless horizon and our little presence on the land and the beautiful peacefulness that brings me. That's something that's come to my mind. And the cloudscape is just, it's an escape. It's a place of peace and comfort and so many things.
Nice. Rick, how about you?
Well, in some ways, it didn't change that much. I'm getting more studio time.
Right.
Lighter here where my studio is. Yeah. But I do miss, I was still getting out by myself quite a bit. And one of my favorite haunts is up in the mountain. And I remember after COVID was, the lockdown, the first lockdown was happening for a while. And the snow was finally melting up in the mountains. And it was so revitalizing to get up there. And one of the ones I'm having the show was one of the first ones where I started a new series on, it's called Snowmelt. And the spring had just hit. It was warm enough to be out there, and the mountain stream was just roaring, and the sounds and the negative ions and just all the energy. It was just so revitalizing. And that's because, I'd been basically locked down for months. Even then, it's been going on about a year now. So that was one thing. And that, if I can pull over here, this is the one called Snowmelt.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that's one of my first of the series of these mountain creeks.
Yeah. This has been the toughest thing for me, not having the work in person. And I keep telling the artists this, but it's when I uncrate your work, it's my Christmas, and there's something about handling the work and moving it around and having it play off each other. It's like these little conversations are happening all throughout the gallery. And I didn't get to have any of those conversations.
I want to see Stephanie's surfaces. It's just, I want to go in there. And
okay, I know. Okay, so I have a little folder here of images.
Do you want to do a little share?
So that's not giving you as much of the thickness right there, but this really does talk about the layering that I explore. And Rick, when you're talking about abstraction and realism, I really love this dance as well. And so ideas of how I can, and Rose, when you talked about tapestry, I actually even use the word weaving when I talk about my painting and weaving color in behind it. So there are all these layers in my mind, and this is my nerdy, geeky mind back from architecture. When we would create our plans, we're using the computer, and there's all these layers you put things on. There's a door layer, there's a window layer, there's a wall layer, there's a plumbing layer, and you can turn them on and off. Or you can have them all on at the same time. So I think about I started to think about my work that way, or describe it. So you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor come in though. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So playing around with pulling color, I mean, I clearly have a square of red that's alive and in the image, but how can I pull it through the painting in other places? And when I put it on initially, there'll be a pattern of where I have red, for example. And then there's a pattern of where I put yellow that has nothing to do in some ways with the actual, where the barn is and the grass is and all that kind of stuff. It's really an abstract composition for me. And then, well, how much of it will come through? How much of it will stay? And just playing with, I don't know, what if I just put these shapes back here and direction and interest? Let me give you another something. Cloud, is this going to do it? No, not that one.
So you just have to close this screen and then pull up your next one. Yeah. And then, so you're out of the share.
Oh, coming back. All right, what just happened?
I can see what you mean by underlayers sort of woven in and then verticals on top of horizontals, which kind of come through in layers. That's beautiful. Right.
So you can see this one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so there's some yellow that I have back in here, and there's some little shapes happening down in here. The ways that I layer this vertical, horizontal, but weaving these colors through. I want to do this one. This gets close to, okay, down, back.
You know what? So one more and then, okay, there we go. Good.
Okay.
That shows the texture. Yeah.
Yeah. That one gets really in. This one has a lot of texture in it. And then you can see just, again, there's just things being woven through here. This red that, you know, I probably smeared across from when I was painting this and just dragged. And then coming to the decision in the moment where there was a whole landscape painting back behind this, not fully developed. And then I came over the top of it and I knew I was going to knock it down later. But anyway, that was that moment of taking a deep breath and going, well, here we go.
As a painter, it's wonderful to get up close and just, it's another experience from, you know, a foot away to like 50 feet away or 20 feet away.
Right. So there's a couple little shots for you.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, so if you just hit stop share.
There we go.
Stephanie, relinquish control. Okay. Okay, I've got a few questions popping in here. From Linda Wright, how does that notion of memory, Rick, come to play in your abstract pieces?
I don't know, where there's the memory of your past work, and actually you could even include the work of others that you've been influenced by, because art is a language that builds on itself, as well as your own body of work over the years. There's that memory. So you build on successes, as we talked about, and then push it into the unknown. But I think even if you're not working with the subject matter, you're remembering effects. You know, whether it's how the light hits the clouds or the sunlight filters through trees in the forest, those memories come out. You just sort of bring that forth and you recall it in the studio.
Yeah. Why would something stay mostly abstract versus something kind of being a little more representational elements start to come through? Why does that? And is this maybe getting into our conversation of patterning a little bit, which I don't want to leave before we do that.
Yeah, I mean, it can be pure patterning without limiting it to describing a particular something in nature. And you're working with just the language of painting, which is basically playing with space. The ambiguities of space, and then clear. As soon as you make a vertical line, you see a tree, or a horizontal line, you see the horizon line. So it's hard not to have visual cues of things, but it can become more and more subjective before you really see things in it. And some people see things in it that I don't see. Yeah. So I don't. It's sort of a distinction that I'm not always comfortable with. You know, abstraction, a landscape, or subjective, or, you know, painting with a subject, or figurative painting. Yeah. I don't always like those distinctions.
It was interesting. Then you would have loved our conversation last night, because it was with two photographers, and I started off by saying, what's the difference between documentary work and fine art? And that basically took the whole call, which is because it's, you know what, it's always that name calling, right? When we try, you know, and then you just all of a sudden are kind of boxed in. And you know what, Rick, I want to, first of all, Scott Wilhite has said, this is a great discussion. I've been feeling a bit stuck with subject/process lately. This is spurring some new ideas and energy. Yay. Rick, I want to read this, what you wrote earlier to me, and that is, pattern recognition is one way that artists naturally use to simplify that complexity, although that term is usually applied to data collecting and algorithms on computers. Fractals and mathematical ways to simplify complexity to an essence and then repeat it. Used in computer animation extensively to render realistic landscapes. I think artists arrive at that kind of simplifying process organically. And I wonder, what I would love to do, you sent me that wonderful Redon image, and I'd love to pull that up and have you talk about it, because it's an inspirational piece for you, and it's just really, I feel like this speaks to your work considerably.
This is Odellan Redon, who really paints from his imagination, but he puts, sometimes, you know, a very similar painting will have a Buddha in it, or mythological figures. This one is pretty much, looks like a fantasy of whatever organic forms, flowers in a tree. But I think it's kind of obvious how it's influenced my work. I don't know what else to say about it. It sort of reveals an inner light.
You know, it's interesting because I don't have a catalog knowledge of your work, but I don't recall ever seeing you put a figure in. And this one, you know, it's like Redon is sort of making this very strong connection between people are the plants are the people. There's a thinking part to nature, and we cannot escape nature in our own. And, you know, it's like completely woven together. And I get that sense out of your work too. Is
great. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that a theme for you?
Yes. For sure.
Yeah.
But you're right. I don't usually put figures or animals in my work. I keep getting tempted to. Odellan Redon would often use butterflies in a similar sort of composition. And I'm just working on a painting now where I have all these leaves that are floating, and I'm trying to make it work. And I was very tempted to throw in butterflies, because leaves actually have that quality already. Mm-hmm. But it's just getting into another realm. So it's I'm kind of tiptoeing around it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hey, did we talk about this Bonnard yet? I don't think so. No. Talk about patterns
right. Yeah, he reduces everything to pattern and color. Mm-hmm. And pattern recognition can be where you're looking at a landscape, say, and you just recognize how patterns, you know, not necessarily on the same form or the same tree, but they repeat each other, and you can build it in such a way that it sort of integrates and interlocks to create sort of a network or a tapestry.
And, you know, when we started talking about this idea of patterning, and I think even before I reached out to you, I was absolutely thinking of Bonnard, because his always feel like these wonderful quilts. And he does something with the work in the way that it opens up. And, you know, like this one, here's this figure down here that is just enveloped in all of this nature. And even as it starts to open up, here's this towel or cloth that's over this railing. But it all is just part of this woven tapestry in a way that he's presenting to us this day. And it has more of a feeling than, and it's like, don't spend a lot of time in Bonnard wondering where that was or what's going on. I mostly just let myself go into it and feel absorbed by it.
Yeah, and he would just, he mostly sketched. I think photography was available. He used that a little bit too, but very rough sketches that he would take from wherever he was, which was, he didn't go to necessarily sublime places. It was just around his home, neighborhood, and bathtub, bathrooms, etc. One thing about Bonnard is when you reduce them to black and white, it's very interesting what happens. And sometimes his figures are hidden and sort of in a condensed value range that you could get lost, except he distinguishes it by pattern and color, as you see here. But sometimes they're even like that, a figure could be just lost in a sea of pattern, except there's a color changed instead of a value change, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah. I don't know how to change this to black and white. I bet there's a way, but it might take me another 25 minutes. And
No, we don't do that.
I'm thinking nobody's gonna.
Love how that I love the feeling of that painting and many of his pieces, that we are connected more with the feeling of being in there instead of the detail and the exactness of it, right? Really, this is very loosely translated, but as you look at the blossoms in the tree, for example, it's like, oh yeah, they just kind of have this spotty feel to them. I love that.
Yeah.
And they don't translate in reproductions all that well when you see them in the museum. Everything just is kind of reduced to light, like there's a inner source of light that pervades everything, and his forms are just dissolving into this basking in this light.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay, believe it or not, it is almost 1 o'clock. Can you believe you made it through? Another grilling by Rose on Zoom.
I like this back and forth, Rose. Before you were kind of featuring one artist and then you move on to the next one. This is a nice format to dialogue.
Yeah,
it's way more fun. I think it is. You know what? Somebody on our call last Friday commented that it felt like she was eavesdropping on a conversation. And I thought, that's fun. That's really fun. I don't know if anyone has any more questions out there, but, I'd like to ask you, Stephanie and Rick, do you have questions for each other? Now you kind of know each other's work a little bit more over the last couple of years.
Gosh. Right. I just, I don't know if I have a question. I just want to say, I remember the first year I saw your work, I was actually, I think, walking around with you, Rose, and I looked at this work and I was just immediately taken with it. There's a little bit more to all of that, which might sound cheesy, so I'm not going to say it out loud, but there was a real warmth to it and a real familiarity, weirdly enough. It reminded me something from just past conversations I'd had with my grandmother and her love of nature and on and on and on and on. And so being close to your work and it's just beautiful. So I just guess I want to say that first and foremost. It's really quite lovely. Really.
Thanks, Stephanie. I don't know if I have any questions either. I relate so much to what you have said. I sort of I get it. And but the way especially when you showed some of the close-ups, the way you weave the layering onto each other is very interesting. And I'm looking behind you, and to think that there was a whole landscape there, I love that. And just how you totally woven this whitish tone over it and painted around the tractor. It's just, it's so juicy, and I can see.
Well, my want with my work is that you see it from a distance and you have some level of engagement, but the closer you get, you start to discover more. And I know I saw that with your work. There's hidden color and there's history. If we go full circle with this conversation, it's the history of the layers that we are literally painting ourselves, but I think represent the time and the feeling, the intuition we have about the subject we're painting, and mine relating more to the weathering of wood and the time of all the surfaces being weathered.
I think it expresses,
how do I translate that?
I think it expresses the complexity of nature more too. I mean, you see trees and how many layers of, like I say, ecosystems within ecosystems that build up all this complex, nature. But one way that I see things, as you talked about, differently up close to further away, is I have a trail back and forth to my studio. It's actually a series of these anti-fatigue mats. Have you seen those? You know.
Oh,
I
yeah.
have them.
Yeah. So I just have a row of them that I walk back and forth all day, so I can get away from it constantly. So I don't know how many miles I put on a day.
You got to get your little fitness tracker going, right?
Yeah, it's your red carpet.
Yeah, right. Get credit for it.
Yeah.
This has been fantastic. And, you know, I have to say, like, first of all, I think we were talking that what has changed in COVID in your work and things like that. And I jokingly say, I think I quarantine rather well. It's like, you know, you're in this space, and I feel like I hear that with all the artists. And it's almost like we walk out of our studio or our space, and people are like, oh my God, there's a new president, and there's quarantine, and there's this. And we're like, wait, what?
Pretty much, yeah.
You know? Yeah, because you kind of go somewhere, right? And but these Zooms have been really nice, and I want to just thank you both so very much, because you know, we do on these talks, and this kind of second iteration of these talks have been digging kind of deeper into your psyche and your thought process, and you know, your spirit behind the work and things like that. And I really appreciate you taking the time to open up and give us this insight. It's so valuable.
Well, thank you, Rose. I mean, podcasts are becoming more and more a thing, and I could see you doing that. I mean, you have taken this situation and really used your creativity to bring, you know, this new way of showing the work and talking about the work, which I think has been really successful.
Yeah.
Well, all right, let's just do it.
Let's just do it. It's great. I love the ideas that you bring, and the, you know, like when you were talking to Rick and I about doing this, it's exciting for me to be able to participate in it. And I can't wait to listen to all the other ones. I'm like, this is awesome. So thank you. You're enriching all of us.
Oh, well, you're most welcome. And Blake Welch has said late to the talk today, but love these last 15 minutes. Thanks. You know, these are all recorded, and you can go back and listen to them. And so please do. And I just want to let everybody know that the artwork is still up online, and almost all of our artists have agreed to let us continue to sell some work through the end of January. And then we are out of the art selling business, but I think I'm going to continue to be in the Zoom pestering business for a while. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Stephanie, Rick, I truly can't thank you.
Thanks to you, Stephanie. Nice to meet you.
You too, Rick. It's great.
Happy Tuesday.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody who hopped on.
Take care, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.